Okay, welcome to the intro for graded assignment 6. This particular assignment just focuses on your understanding of modern JavaScript and React from chapters 28 through 31 in the new curriculum. So if you come over here to the section on graded assignments down here and go all the way to assignment 6, this one's called Orbit Report. And it starts out by giving you an introduction, just talking about how you're going to have this satellite data that you can display in a table and sort by, or filter, I guess we should say, by types of orbit paths. So you can, well, you'll have some buttons where you can just click on, I only want to see the ones in low, or I only want to see the ones in medium or high. And you're going to add a banner to the page that does not yet exist. So that'll be a new component. You'll finish the table to make sure all the data is rendered properly in all of the columns and rows, and then add all the buttons that are needed. And so the first thing that you need to do is to fork and clone the graded assignment code that they provide. This is not in GitHub Classroom. It's just a regular repo. So you can do this like you've done for a lot of your studios and things. And then just, get it on your computer, open it up in VS Code, and go ahead and get it started. Now, we'll go over the steps for this in a second, but they do show you here before we move on what it looks like when you first get it running and what it should look like if you go all the way through the styling part, which is optional. Or if you don't do the styling, then it should look like this. So let's take a look at this. They tell you that once you have forked and cloned it and you've got it on your machine, the first thing you need to do inside the project directory is run npm install. That's because the dependencies are not included with the code that actually comes down to your computer. So this node modules folder will not exist until you actually install the dependencies. There's a git ignore file down here that, tells Git, ignore this whenever you are, looking at all the files that need to be staged and committed as part of the project. So it ignores this, meaning it's not actually part of the repo. So you just use npm to install it instead. And then you'll have this node modules file. And then when you go ahead and do the next command, npm start, it should be up and running just fine. So you can, take a look at the components. The components directory here has a CSS file, styling.css. It has the satellite data, which is just a bunch of JavaScript objects that is, exported from here to where you can use it wherever you need it. And then there's also some existing components. There is, of course, the app.js component, and right now it's just got the buttons in the table. So those are the two components that exist here. And then you're going to add another component, banner, and follow the instructions to add that as well. So once you get it up and running and you've got this, you can move on. And this goes through the instructions on how to add the banner component and what you need to put inside of it. They give you, in some cases, they give you the code and show you what to do. They tell you to put the tag here, the title in the header, orbit report, directly inside the header. And that's correct. Later, when I talk about the styling, I will point something out about the CSS file that you may need to change. But follow these instructions because it'll all work out. And then after you've done the banner, you're going to update app.js because it's time to actually bring in the data. And so they want you to use a state variable and a way to keep track of which orbit type you want to look at any given point, and then a function that's going to filter through the satellites. And you don't have to write most of this code. They're actually providing it for you. So this part is actually pretty straightforward. Just go through and follow these instructions step by step. They'll explain to you when you've got a state variable and what you're going to do with it. This function excuse me, yeah, this, sorry, this display sat, that's a way to actually create a new array that filters it down a little bit, because sets make sure that you only have unique items. So this kind of explains that. And then the function filter by type, they give it to you here and they explain, what it does. And they use this terminology here, callback. I've never seen callback used this way before. Callback usually refers to an entire function that is passed to a function. This new sat display, I would call this just a parameter, because it's the callback is actually this entire function, this anonymous function that's being passed to filter. So you're passing, the anonymous function to a function, but then this is the parameter for that function. So anytime you see that, it's really just talking about the parameters for the callback function. So just, go through and do that, update this. It tells you which props you need and which things to pass down. And they hand you this information, but study it, make sure you understand it before you move on, because you're going to be making use of all these things in these other components where you're passing these things down. So you need to understand what they represent. In the buttons, something that has tripped up some students already was this instruction that says here that there's 4 clickable buttons, and then they say, update the first button, update the second button. This first one is 3 buttons actually. So when they say first button, they're referring to this placeholder button right here, that you're actually going to replace this with 3 different buttons. So that's what they mean by that. And they want you to use map to create 3 instances of a button and just give it different data each time, using that filtering method to make sure that each one has a different value. And then the second button is just you're just going to wire up that button that already exists. The second one, that's just all orbits. Okay. So once you've taken care of that, the buttons will be ready, but you have to have a table to actually see what it is that's supposed to be displayed. So they want you to set up a table that has 4 columns, and they tell you what the header row should have. It should have name, type of satellite, launch date, and status. Do them in that order. And they've provided, over here in table, they've provided the general structure. So you just need to fill in what's missing, or, and replace the generic stuff with what they actually want. So once you've done the header, then you can also generate rows below that with all 4 columns. And this is an example of what one of those columns for a row might look like when you're using the data that's provided. They actually, let's see if I can find here. Yeah, right here, when they talk about iterating through the sat prop, they say use the following callbacks. Again, I would call these parameters for the callback function. ID and data. Now this is important. By ID, they really mean index, because that's what map provides. It provides something to represent the element of the array, and then an index, and you have to put them in a certain order. So think about that, because if you put them in the opposite order, it doesn't know what to do with it. But that really is, you're going to use it as an ID of sorts to set the key, but it really is just the index of the element in that array. So that's what that means, just in case that was confusing. And then, when they say for the status here, this is just referring to that column, that when you are working with this column, they want you to have 2 different possible values, either active or inactive, depending on what the operational property of the data says for that satellite. So once you've done that, all that's left to do, and you can test it out and see that, you can press on the buttons and you should see different satellites depending on which buttons you press. And I'll demo this for you in a second. step 6 is the optional styling features. They pretty much just say all you need to do is import the styling file into these 3 files. And then in this one, you just need to add a class name, Flux container, to the div that's surrounding the buttons. And this is optional, but if you do decide to do it, there might be one hiccup. Remember I said that in Banner, they want you to put the title inside a header element, right? Header tag. That's fine, but then you may find that the banner is not styled and you're wondering why. So if you come over here to styling, you can see that they've provided, you know, the Flux container class. They've got styling for the table and all of its parts, styling for the buttons. And then you see H1 and P here and H1 down here, and you're thinking to yourself, but there aren't any H1s in the project. So they may fix this eventually, but all you need to do is change this to header, which does exist in the project, and change this to header. And then the styling is applied perfectly, and it looks just like it did in that screenshot at the very beginning of the instructions. So I'm gonna do this just so I don't have to commit it. Okay, so let me come here because the last thing that you want to do is to run your tests. The very last step here, if I go to next, is how to run the auto grading tests in the local environment to make sure that it's going to run on the GitHub Actions once you push your code up to your repo. So, you know, before you've done anything or before you finished, you're going to see, you know, this, but once you're done, all the tests should be passing. And they do tell you down here, you may get this response the first time you try to run npm test. And so if this happens, all you have to do is hit A and enter, or maybe just A, and it will run all the tests. And then you will actually be able to see the results. So let me switch over to my solution branch and make sure I don't have any files open. All right, npm solution. I'm gonna say npm. Listen to me. Okay, I'm get checkout. That's what I'm trying to do. Okay, get checkout solution. So if we come over here now, I can demo for you what this looks like. So this is the styled version. And these 4 buttons, you can press on them and get different responses. Let me back this out a little bit. There we go. So there's the low orbit satellites. There's the medium orbit satellite, a couple of high orbit satellites. And if you want to go back to see all orbits, you just press this button and they all come back. And that's what that, you know, filtering function was doing, is actually, you know, just using those different values to, and then each one is, you know, connected to a different button with that value so that it knows which ones to display. And, you know, that's where studying that code that they give you in the instructions is important, because otherwise, you know, you may not fully understand what's really happening. But I definitely recommend you study anything that they hand you to make sure you understand it. Especially because you're going to need to be able to describe it to your TA and tell, you know, show them that you understand how it's working when it comes time for your demo. Okay, so so you can see it's working. That's great. If I want to run the test, I can say npm test singular right there. And this is where, yeah, it didn't find anything new because I haven't committed anything new. So I hit A and then just give it a second. And there you go. You can see, I'm going to bring this up so you can see the entire thing. Yeah, pass, and everything is passing after I went through all the steps and got everything working. So this is what you're going for. That's what you want to shoot for. And this is a not a terribly difficult assignment, because, you know, in my lectures, I've given you a lot of extra content, other things that you can learn to fill out your knowledge of React a little bit. But, you know, this stuff is the more basic things that they are teaching you in the chapter. And if there's anything that you haven't seen before, they're kind of handing it to you and explaining it. That reminds me, there is one more thing that I did want to show you. Let's see, I'm going to cancel out of this and check out main again so I can bring up the starter code. In table, they talk about how they've given you this sat prop, right? You'll notice that, normally you'd say, well, aren't you supposed to like import props? And because I haven't demonstrated it this way. They're deconstructing. If you notice those fancy braces there, you can see all they're doing is saying, normally we would just put props here and then maybe on a separate line, we might deconstruct sat from props there, but they're just doing it right here and saying, this is the only prop, I'm just going to deconstruct it here. And so that's why it's in those fancy braces right there. And then you have immediate access to that prop, which when you don't have a lot of props, this is a perfectly good way to go. It saves you a couple lines of code. So that's what's going on there. I just wanted to point that out because I did not ever demonstrate it that way to you guys. Okay, so I think that's it. I think you guys will be good to go. And this is the last thing to check off to finish Unit 1. So I wish you all the best of luck, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in Unit 2.